The Insights Idaho Department of Finance communicates department news and perspectives to aid consumers in making educated financial decisions and to inform both industry and consumers of regulatory and consumer protection issues.
Hello, welcome to the second episode of Insights. I'm Celia Kenny, Consumer Affairs Officer with the Idaho Department of Finance. It's a pleasure to introduce our speakers for this segment, highlighting Idaho State Chartered Credit Unions. Today we will hear about how this industry has transformed over time and why Idaho consumers, businesses, and communities should consider partnering with a local financial institution. With us to cover this topic, we have Salvador Cruz, Financial Institutions Bureau Chief of the Idaho Department of Finance, and Troy Stang. Troy is the President and CEO of GoWest Credit Union Association. This is a newly formed 6-state credit union association. Troy is also the president of the Northwest Credit Union Foundation and the president of Strategic Link Incorporated. He has led Northwest-based credit union trade associations for over a decade and previously served as senior staff to the U.S. Treasury Secretary under President George W. Bush administration. Those are some impressive credentials, Troy, and I look forward to hearing your perspective. I appreciate both of today's speakers for making time to be here. And with that, I'll transition to you, Sal. Please take it away.
Thank you, Celia. And thank you, Troy, for being here. My title is Financial Institutions Bureau Chief, and that's a very bureaucratic way of saying that I oversee banks, credit unions, trust companies, and business industrial corporations. Today, we're going to focus mainly on credit unions, and it's a pleasure to have Troy with us. Financial institutions in Idaho are very vital to the Idaho economy, and there are a lot of things that happen that the general consumer is not aware of. And to shed light on that topic, I'd like to welcome Troy. Let's start out. Can you just share a little bit about yourself and where your passion for the credit union industry comes from?
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation, and it's really a pleasure to be here and be a part of this morning's broadcast. I got my start in central Minnesota in a very rural area, grew up on a family dairy farm, and everything that we did in that local rural community was cooperatively based. Our farm interacted with local co-ops for feed, grain, seeds. We sold our dairy milk to a dairy co-op, and all of our capital, all the financing needs of the family farm came through the credit union. So the cooperative way of life really was woven into the fabric of what I grew up in and around. And when I came to the Northwest back in 2008, being a part of the credit union movement seemed like just a natural fit. And truly, across Idaho and across our Northwest states, the cooperative vibe, if you will, the cooperative way of doing business really exists from north to south, east and west throughout this state. And so credit unions have been a great fit for the consumer here in Idaho.
That's wonderful. And I always have to give a shout out to anybody that's from the Midwest. It seems that the more you move across this country, the more you meet people that have roots in the Midwest. My roots from the Midwest start in South Dakota, but my first exposure to financial institutions from an oversight perspective was in Crookston, Minnesota. So there's a special place in my heart for Minnesota specifically. So I appreciate that. You did talk a little bit about the cooperative nature of your upbringing and how that how that was ingrained in you, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but how moving to a credit union was just intuitive because of the cooperative nature. Can you speak a little bit to how a credit union is a cooperative and what makes that unique compared to other financial institutions?
Yeah, so growing up on the family farm, I either was going to take over the farm or get an education and get into some other industry and field. And so the move through my secondary education and finance, moving to the credit union seemed like a natural fit. And what I learned in my first job in the local credit union, which, by the way, my grandpa actually chartered in 1934 because he got declined for a loan for a piece of farm equipment at another institution. And he and his 8 brothers gathered all the local Catholic parishioners and started a faith-based credit union. And I love sharing that story because it really speaks to the credit unions across America, but especially in Idaho. Being locally owned, being member-centric institutions where people of common interests, common needs have come together to pool their money to provide services and loan it out to each other. That DNA is what really makes credit unions special, really makes them different, and so accountable to the consumers and the marketplaces that they serve. And I think that's really consistent with the tenor and culture in Idaho. People love doing business with whom they know, who they trust, and the credit union's first line accountability is to the consumers, the members, and the memberships and the communities they serve. And we really love being Idaho-based institutions. Having that oversight, having the business license from the state of Idaho allows the credit unions, a direct dialogue with the regulatory community, which is valued so much in the work that we do day in and day out.
Can you explain a little bit about the Northwest Credit Union Association, who it is and what it does for supporting Idaho State Chartered Credit Union?
So every industry, or most industries, have an organizing association, an association that represents their interests, which might provide them products and services. Our focus as the Northwest Credit Union Association is representing the credit unions of Idaho, making sure their collective voice, spoken from a single song sheet, a single voice, is provided not only to the regulators and public policy, but also to the public. We've got a large responsibility to help ensure the general public understands who credit unions are, what we can do in the realm of products and services, and how credit unions can truly be a set of solutions for every household across Idaho.
As you know, this podcast, we're really trying to focus and highlight our Idaho State Chartered Credit Unions, or financial institutions for that matter. And the general consumer may not have a complete understanding of what's the difference between a federally chartered credit union and a state chartered credit union. In less than 30 seconds, can you give a brief synopsis on that?
Because we are a regulated industry, a financial services industry, we need to have a business license. And credit unions can organize and decide, should they be chartered as a state chartered institution? Should they get their business license from the state? Or should they get it from the federal government, the NCUA, the National Credit Union Administration? The majority of the credit unions in Idaho choose to be state chartered. They love the closeness and the ability to have a relationship with the regulator, the oversight body. And there's over 30 credit unions in the state of Idaho today, serving almost 60% of the population.
And it kind of speaks to the vitality of Idaho itself, right? There are a multitude of choices, financial choices, that an Idaho consumer can make, whether it's a credit union or another financial institution, a regulated institution or an unregulated institution. I think that Idaho does provide that business-friendly environment where any financial institution can flourish, and in turn, the market helps decide, and by the market, the consumers get to decide which business plan works best, what suits them. And you mentioned something, you've touched on a topic that I kind of want to explore just a little bit further, and that has to deal with going back to your roots, the dairy farm, the cooperative, having the common bond within the community. Can you speak a little bit to common bond as it relates to credit unions and how that ties a credit union and its community together?
Again, all credit unions are owned by a group of people. That's the cooperative juice. That's the cooperative framework. And if you go back to the story of my grandpa's credit union, their common link at the time was agriculture. It was the Catholic Church. It was the means in the mid-1930s to communicate with each other, to build community. You farmed by day, you went to church in the evenings and the weekends, and that's where you built community. Today, fast forward, the communication frameworks, whether it's podcasts, email, text messages, end up being such a way of bringing people together. And if you pull on the thread of any of the 30-some Idaho credit unions, each one has a story from where they started, how they started with a local common bond, and how they maintained relevancy over the years. And that relevancy shows up in the form of products and services. If I think back to Grandpa's credit union, it was probably small savings and small loans or loans for agricultural equipment. Grandpa would probably be turning over in his grave today if he knew that same credit union is doing electronic services, ACHs, that you're able to text somebody and transfer money. And that speaks to the evolution of financial services. And that speed of change is something that credit unions need to stay in tune. All institutions need to stay in tune with in order to be relevant to the customers, the members, the consumers, the marketplace that you're serving. And so if you go to Idaho and you go to northern Idaho, central Idaho, east Idaho, you will find a credit union brand that is woven in the fabric of the community, that is a part of that community organizing principles.
Shifting gears just a little bit, can you speak to the impact a state charter credit union has on local communities and perhaps provide some examples?
So credit unions, being not-for-profit cooperatives, we firmly believe that structure, that public policy entrusts us with, a cooperative structure, inherently we've got to prove day in and day out that we can generate and deliver real tangible value to the consumer. That shows up in a vast array of products and services that are relevant. It shows up in pricing of products, whether interest rates on loans and savings, that's advantageous to the consumer, to the borrower, to the savers, and access to financial services, whether that's with a physical branch in a local community or the technology and services. So you weave that all together, and inherently it's real tangible value. And that's the chase. That's the work every credit union is up to day in and day out to make sure as a financial institution, it's delivering real tangible value. You ask about community, and there's another component, and it's the impact in any community. There is an expectation or inherent, as a consumer, as a member of a community, you want to see good corporate stewards of a community. And again, if you go to East Idaho, if you go downtown Boise, if you go to any of the suburbs, you will see credit unions woven in the fabric of the communities. They're a part of the schools. They're a part of the faith-based communities. They're woven in how people live and how these communities exist and prosper. And we believe, credit unions believe, that's part of our DNA. That's part of our social responsibility as cooperatives to not only return real tangible value to the wallets of the consumers, the members that they serve, but also make an impact in the communities. And I've often said, if one day suddenly credit unions did not exist, I think these communities, the fabric of the community, you would feel it because we're so woven in to the DNA of what makes Idaho a great place to live.
You spent some time talking about the unique bond between the community and a credit union and their ability to uniquely service their members and also the community at large by returning either time or resources to their community. There is a segment of the Idaho population, and nationally for that matter, where they have access to a savings account, but they may not qualify for a checking account or a loan. We call that the underbanked. There's also a subset of the population that just can't, for whatever reason, get access or gain entry into the financial system. How do Idaho state charter credit unions help in that regard? How do they push to?
Frankly, the DNA of credit unions being member-owned, member accountable, accountable to the communities, it's woven in the fabric of who we are. I talk a little bit about Grandpa's story and that common bond and understanding where your membership base is coming from, understanding the journey that every member walked and traveled to get to where they are. As a member-driven cooperative, we hear story after story after story of credit unions giving that voice, giving that opportunity to have that member, that potential member, tell the story that they're on, explain why they might not have a credit history, explain why they probably haven't had the ability to build savings. I often talk about the story of a member that I served when I worked in my first credit union early in my career, and Alan would come into the credit union every Thursday to borrow $25, $26, $28 on a Thursday in order to put gas in his truck, in order to buy groceries for his family, in order to get to Friday, because Friday was payday. And like clockwork, Alan would come back in. He'd be the last member in the door at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, or the first member in the door on Saturday morning to pay his $26 loan back. And I know for a fact his family did not know that he was stopping in on a Thursday so that he could put food on the table on Friday for his family. And it was so enlightening to walk that journey with Alan. Over the weeks, over the months, over the years, we taught Alan how to slowly not have to borrow $26, to slowly start saving with every paycheck. And I don't get back to Minnesota often, but I did go back a couple years ago to visit my family and drove those old county roads that I grew up on. And there was nothing more rewarding than to see a mailbox with Alan's name on it. Those dreams, those things Alan wanted to accomplish, not only in the near term with his family, trying to get from paycheck to paycheck, week to week, but he, just like the rest of us, had a dream of having a home that he could call his own. And to see that mailbox in a tree-lined driveway with a new home or a newer home built along the river and his name on the mailbox, that was a sense of pride for me, that each and every person has a set of dreams that, with a great partner, can eventually realize what's possible.
It's interesting because from our perspective at the Department of Finance, we're hyper focused on providing resources to Idaho consumers, financial choice. And what I hear you saying is that the credit union industry is uniquely positioned to help those Allens of the world if he's willing to ask for help. Are there any initiatives or things on the horizon from the credit union world that you see that kind of goes in that direction a little bit more?
You know, when you think through the lens of a consumer, and you think about the 30 credit unions and the other financial institutions across Idaho, there's a bit of formality to the financial services business. For any of the consumers listening, I would encourage you to be brave. Walk in and share your story, share your dreams with the financial institution professionals, because there are a lot of options and a lot of choices for a consumer, for a small business, to have the counseling, to have the guidance from a financial partner. And so message number one, be brave, have the encouragement to walk in and share your story, and ask for that sort of guidance. There's a lot of professional skill set there to help any consumer continue to advance their financial well-being. There's also several programs that Idaho credit unions have taken under their wing. We know our state's population is changing and growing, and we're welcoming new people into our state borders day in and day out. And some people aren't familiar with Idaho, aren't familiar with the new home and the new community that they're a part of. A number of credit unions have adopted a Juntos designation, which is a Hispanic designation that says we welcome you. We speak your language. We understand the journey that you're on. And some of those initiatives really are catered towards people who may not have banked at a traditional financial institution like a credit union, and help them with product education. How to save, how to borrow, how to build a credit report. And those are the first steps in building a financially sound wallet, a financially sound household, step by step.
we get calls from the community every so often, and one of the trends that we've noticed is that in our rural communities, there's this trend that financial institutions are closing their doors and they're leaving town. And we can't fault them for leaving. That's a business decision. That's up to them and either their members or their shareholders. But we get these calls from business leaders, from community leaders saying, how do we get a financial institution in our community? What do we need to do that? And it really, and you can hear it in their voice. I think there's a common perception out there that everything is going digital. I have a digital bank or digital credit union on my phone, and that's all I need. But to rural communities, having a financial institution in the heart of downtown is not only a badge of honor, but it's one of those aspects that's the lifeblood of it's the economic engine of that community. What should those community leaders do to get a financial institution in their communities?
I'm glad to hear that you're getting those phone calls. As the chief regulator, if you will, of financial institutions and the financial commerce in the state of Idaho, the fact that those communities are reaching out to you and asking the question tells me that they're thinking strategically about the livelihood, the viability of their community in the next generation. And I think we've just, as a society, have navigated not only what was now cloned as the Great Recession, but a global pandemic. And we have seen population trends change, and so many rural communities really reinvigorate themselves, redefining the quality of life, what they can offer to their community, what kind of community can they be, and they recognize they need a financial partner as a part of that journey of being a place that people want to be. You hit the nail on the head. The day and age of the big brick and mortar financial institution on the corner of Main Street might have come and gone because a financial institution doesn't need quite the square footage and quite the extent of overhead. But how you define local and how do you define access? I think we've also not only transitioned through a Great Recession and a global pandemic, but we've also transitioned into a day of access that wasn't possible in Grandpa's era, where you had to walk into the financial institution with money and do the transaction. So much of it is digital. That said, these institutions are also very, very cognizant of where can they, as a financial institution and responsible party to be part of the fabric of these communities, where can they participate in the economic vitality and the economic revitalization of a community, especially one that's passionate about redefining who they are. So I'm actually looking through this with through a very positive lens, that if you are getting the calls, there's a group of community leaders who are committed to provide and bring that juice back into the community, and that's a beautiful sign.
Absolutely.
So it's frankly one of the, I think, silver linings that came out of our global pandemic, where quality of life, the quality of the community has now been reinvigorated and put as a priority amongst its own citizens.
Yeah, the sense of community that has come with from the pandemic is truly a silver lining, and for all of the controversy and conflict that and perceived disagreements as related to how we approach things, you do walk around and you do feel and you do see communities tighter knit.
And those leaders, the citizens of those communities, are looking for more than just a place to make a deposit and do a transaction. They're looking for a financial institution who's going to be a partner and a part of the fabric of the communities. And the institutions, we're blessed in the state of Idaho to have institutions who are modern, who are innovative, who are delivering their services not only in the traditional face-to-face and brick and mortar sense, but filled with technology and choices and options right on our phones to be able to transact money between consumers and small businesses. And so my comments come with a bit of a challenge and question, an opportunity for the communities and small businesses that make up an economy in any corner of Idaho, and that is look for your financial partner, an institution. They're out there.
I'd like to take a walk down memory lane. And in the not too distant past, there was a time in 2008, 2009, where we all thought the financial world was going to come to an end. There were so many people that were displaced. I recall turning on the news and seeing lines around financial institutions in Idaho, across the country. There was fear, there was stress, we didn't know what was happening. And then you fast forward to 2020, end of 2019, 2020, and we found ourselves in a situation where we were stressed. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. All that we knew was that we had to be home. We had to stay close to the people that we loved most. And we all know someone or know of someone that was impacted by the Great Recession, that had their home foreclosed or was overextended on a loan. We also know someone or of someone that had COVID or knew somebody that was infected with COVID and possibly didn't make it, unfortunately. That's a long-winded precursor to ask my question. We've gone through 2 crises in 15 years. How has the credit union industry adapted to meet the needs of its members during that time?
As you talk about those major life-changing events that we've gone through, a Great Recession, a global pandemic, in part of my bio, I spent now half my career on the public policy association side, but my early half of my career was in financial institutions, in credit unions, having lived through the Great Recession and what you just described, Sal, having members walk in the door, giving up hope, turning in their car keys, turning in their house keys. Those are tough conversations to go through. Nobody wants to have them. The financial institution doesn't, but let me tell you, the family, the consumer doesn't want to have those conversations as well. So we've had some major life lessons: recession, global pandemic, and then all the emotion that you described, whether losing loved ones, whether being impacted and isolated through COVID. The life lesson that I took away from that is control what you can control. Within all of that, there's things as a consumer you can control, and one of them is your financials, your financial health. And we talked about the example of Alan. We've talked about other examples of needing to budget, wanting to budget. And every consumer, every small business can put themselves in control by choosing a good financial partner to walk through not only the early questions of affordability, but then those life journey discussions about college education, about those next stages of life, retirement, you name it. And you've heard all the statistics. I think one of the statistics is 50% of Americans can't assemble $400 within a week or 10 days. And there's things the consumer and the financial institution in partnership can do to help build better financial lives, to help build healthier wallets, family budgets. But it takes a dialogue and it takes a partner to go through that journey. I talk about small businesses. I talk about young families or families going through those next stages of life where the kids are getting ready to go to college, and you see the price tag of what that means for an individual household. But there's things along those journeys that the consumer can stay in control of their own destiny and take that level of stress off the table. And I can't predict if we're going to have another recession. I can't predict if we're going to have another pandemic. I'm certain we will. We'll probably see those things in our lifetime. But what you can control is your financial wellness, your financial health, if you will.
One of the things that I think doesn't get enough recognition is what financial institutions were asked to do at the height of the pandemic. The consumer, sometimes the general public may have heard of the CARES Act or some of these economic initiatives to stimulate and revamp the economy when the entire economy went into shutdown. Can you talk a little bit about what Idaho State Charter Credit Unions were asked to do and how they performed?
What was different in the global pandemic versus the Great Recession, and based on my bio, if you did the math, the time that I was in D.C. With the White House, with the U.S. Treasury, was leading up to the Great Recession. What happened from a public policy standpoint there was, let's wait and see what happens, is how public policy addressed it, and to see where the chips might fall. And there were so many people impacted by the Great Recession and so many financial institutions that don't exist anymore today. What was, fast forward to the pandemic, what was different in public policy, right, wrong, or indifferent, was there were a number of stimulus programs advanced by Congress to bring dollars to the individual states and let states decide how to distribute those dollars. Some of the programs were distributed through the Small Business Administration, the SBA. Other programs were in the form of grants or other dollars. And the financial institutions, remember, we all lived through it. Should you get a vaccine? Shouldn't you get a vaccine? Should you wear a mask? Shouldn't you wear a mask? What are the standards? And it was different in every one of our communities. Financial institutions, including credit unions, were running businesses, retail branches that help members, the consumers, the communities day in and day out. And those protocols had to be sorted out and figured out amongst their staff to serve the members. We as financial institution had to make the consumer, the public, feel confident that they had access to their money, that they had the financial guidance that they needed without skipping a beat. And that brought us into that whole discussion about being essential businesses. In addition, each state, as I said, was granted some dollars through the CARES Act, and it was so inspiring to see the state chartered institutions turn those dollars from Congress into paycheck protection programs, the PPP loans, or small business grants, and other dollars that helped give the consumer and small businesses confidence to manage through the global pandemic. Again, a different public policy approach where public policy provided a whole lot of resources, but it was up to the financial institutions to get those resources distributed. And I'm really curious to see what your perspective is as the lead financial institution regulator from where you sit. But from our credit union lens, we saw credit unions across Idaho jump into that program and help distribute those dollars to the people who needed it most.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and there were several key moments during the CARES Act and the subsequent economic incentive programs that went through, that financial institutions, they all stepped to the plate. They all said, we will do this. Our communities are impacted. Every single one of their employees were impacted. We're talking about financial institutions that were operating at half capacity, maybe a quarter of capacity, because we didn't know what we didn't know about the pandemic. And those are hard business decisions to make. And then when you have the federal government and state and local state government saying, we have money that we need you to get out into the local economy. And financial institutions, credit unions, they did it. They made as many of those PPP loans as they did. When the unemployment checks came out, they distributed those as fast as they could. The child tax credit checks, those came out. Those were, ACH'd out, and they got into the pockets of the people that needed them when they needed them.
And frankly, the Department of Financial Institutions really is to be acknowledged in this process too. None of us, including the regulator, knew exactly how these programs were going to be administered, but you gave the encouragement and you had the trust of Idaho's institutions that they'd figure it out, get it distributed, and in a way that, nobody likes the overreach of government and the overreach of regulation. But your role, what you embraced during that time as a state of Idaho, was get the dollars out into the marketplace, get it out to the consumers, the small businesses. And I think that was a huge contributor in making sure the dollars went where they were needed most at a time when people were dealing with tons of other uncertainties. That's one place I think collectively government and the institution showed up great.
As a state regulator, we're always looking ahead, and I know that industry is constantly looking ahead as well. What do you see the credit union industry like in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Sometimes before you can look through the windshield, you do have to look through the rearview mirror, and we did that. And looking through the windshield, if you agree and accept the fact things, technology, and what have you is changing, is going to change faster tomorrow than it changed yesterday. The type of delivery of electronic services, digital services, mobile access that will exist in the next year, 5 years from now, I think will amaze all of us. The adoption and the ability for institutions to implement that in a manner that is user-friendly, safe and sound and secure, and gives the consumer confidence that my payment or my asset or my money is safe, secure, and being transferred in a manner to the next party, whether it's a retail or a family member or just a person-to-person transfer, is done in a way with safety and soundness and the money secure. That sort of responsibility will not go away.
There's a positive view from my perspective of what the financial institution's positions are, or what a financial institution's position is going forward. And it's going to be that institution that it can engage with the consumer on the consumer level that'll really make significant strides, in my opinion.
So those two memory lane things we talked about, recession and global pandemic, while there was a lot of angst and negative that came out of it, there was a whole lot of positive. We talked about the community building. We talked about the access. The one thing we really haven't highlighted is the adoption of technology. The consumer and the small business, I think, was forced, and they were ready for it. I would say they were ready for it. But they were forced both feet forward into technology advancements. You talk about rural areas. We talked about the retail branch and the desire of humans to go in and transact. Well, during the pandemic, the credit union teams were dealing with COVID cases in their own team members, and in some cases, had to physically close the lobbies. But with the advancement of technologies like automated teller machines that could be staffed via video through a call center or a location where they had enough staff, gave the confidence to a member in a rural community that I can still talk to a member service representative through the video teller machine and still have that guidance and still get that transaction done. So that video adoption, that technology adoption, I think helped pole vault us into the next generation of how we accessed our financial services. And it's no secret, there's probably more apps accessible to any consumer where you can load some sort of financial value to buy a product. You can go to a coffee shop and use your app that's preloaded with dollars. And so there's transactions being done in that manner today that are so different than the type of transaction my grandpa engaged in. And again, I can't sit here and say and in 5 years, it's going to look like this, or in 10 years, it's going to look like X. But we, as the leaders of the regulatory community, we, the leaders of the industry, the leaders of the financial institutions, and the members, should embrace what's next and the ability for these businesses and the way that we transact to continue to evolve.
Yeah, I think that if the pandemic taught us one or two things, that's adaptability and flexibility. And those institutions and those consumers, for that matter, that were flexible and they adapted to what was transpiring around us, they benefited in the long run. And I hope that continues to be the case.
The cool thing about credit unions, I said it from the beginning, is our accountability, because of our structure, being owned by the members, accountable to the member owners and the communities we serve. When they're telling us they're comfortable with, they want that next technology, that's a good green light for us as an industry, us as an institution, to step into that next evolution. And I think it's a good sign to the regulator community as well to embrace that next generation of whatever it might be.
One of the things that we mentioned, what we talked about earlier, was the Great Recession and people struggling, and even during the pandemic. And we talked about how some of the individuals in the underbanked community, there's a level of, we didn't come out and say it, but there's a level of stress and angst within that community. Not even the underbanked, just even in current members of a financial institution. What would you say to a member that is struggling today to make the mortgage payment at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month, the car loan payment, make ends meet? What would your advice be to them in communicating to their financial institution, to their credit union?
You heard me frame up that whole conversation about money in a household as financial wellness. Financial wellness, when you have comfort or understanding of where your wallet is, also ties into and relates to health. Health and stress in a household, in a consumer, and you can't separate the two. But the financial management component, the financial wellness component, as much anxiety as it can contribute to a household, it is something you can manage too. And so my encouragement to the consumer is reach out to a financial institution, reach out to your local institution and have the conversation. And I say that acknowledging that talking about money is not the first choice of all of us. And then to be able to share and really relate to your financial partner that these are the things that I'm worried about. That can be a difficult conversation to have, but you will be amazed at how much the person, the institution across the desk from you is there to help, is there to help figure out what are those next steps you need to take to help meet your lifetime goals.
It's in everyone's best interest that consumer succeed in their mental health, in their life, in their professional life, and the financial institution is there to help along the way as much as they can. And it's better to have that conversation with your financial institution as opposed to hold that all in for months, maybe even a year, and then one day just throw up your hands.
I wish somehow we could erase the stigma that the financial institution has in the eyes of a consumer. There's fear, and it doesn't have to be. They can be such a partner to the consumer to help accomplish their financial dreams.
First of all, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoy visiting with you, Troy. Are there any misconceptions about a credit union or anything else you'd like to share about credit unions before we wrap up?
I would go back to our structure. Being member-owned, being a cooperative is a very unique structure for a financial institution. So I keep on saying we're first accountable to the members, the consumers that we serve, and the small businesses that we serve. And that line of accountability comes through a lens of safety and soundness. It comes through a lens of doing what's right for the members that you're serving, the communities that you're serving. It also, the cooperative is accountable to ensure the real tangible value shows up in the products and services and the access. So who's winning when a cooperative does well, when a credit union does well, is the members, because it's this constant cycle of reinvesting in the membership base in the form of pricing on products and services, more access. And it's been really fun to see each of these credit unions continue to evolve throughout their time in serving Idaho communities. And I think it's a beautiful model of financial services that we're lucky to have in our country.
So, Troy, thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I love talking to you, and I'll just turn it over to Celia.
Thank you, Sal. Yes, I'd like to thank Troy as well as Sal for carving out time from their busy schedules to be here today. This has been an illuminating conversation. To take it back to what Troy had said, I think that there are a lot of Allens out there, a lot of consumers that benefit when community stakeholders and regulators and leaders come together to have these kinds of discussions. So we appreciate your time. Also, the Department of Finance would like listeners to know that we are committed to safeguarding the financial health of Idahoans through the appropriate oversight of diverse financial institutions and the education and protection of consumers. For more information on financial literacy topics like community banking and for additional resources, please do visit our website at www.finance.idaho.gov. And finally, as we progress with this project, we want to hear from you, to engage with Idaho consumers about ideas and topics that are on your mind. Please forward your suggestions and feedback to our email, finance@finance.idaho.gov. And please consider following the department on social media for news, important alerts, and other helpful resources on Facebook at Idaho DOF and on Twitter at Idaho Finance.
We want to thank you for joining us for our production of Insights, the Idaho Department of Finance. We'd love to hear from you and learn more about the ideas and topics that are on your mind. Forward your suggestions and feedback to our email address, finance@finance.idaho.gov.